City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to the Harold Clurman Seminar on Theater. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest today is one of the country's most interesting, most original, most provocative playwrights, Arthur Kopit. Arthur, welcome. Thank you for being with us. I was thinking about, in terms of your plays, that either you seem to go for short one-word names like Indians or Wings or Nine, or very long titles like End of the World with Symposium to Follow, or the first one that was a big success, which was Oh Dad, Poor Dad, Mama's Hung You in the Closet and I'm Feeling So Sad. I want to start with that play because you, you wrote that with with several other plays, I think, when you were still in Harvard as an undergraduate.
I had just graduated. It was in the summer after graduation.
Oh,
I
really?
wrote that.
Did you write some plays while you were actually an undergraduate at Harvard?
Yeah, I'd written, I don't know, quite a few. I'd written 2 full-length plays, and I'd had 6 or 7 one-act plays done there, most of which
at Harvard
as an undergraduate.
At what sort of, at clubs or in drama groups or what?
Some with the Harvard Dramatic Club, some just in the house dining halls at Harvard. It's set up. The houses are like colleges at Yale, or fraternity system, and I'd always felt actually that I was very fortunate that I was there just before the Loeb Theater came in, and there were no real technical facilities. So we had to do it ourselves, and we would stage plays, clear a section of the dining hall, bring in some platforms and some lights, and it was a pretty much do-it-yourself operation.
And you felt was a good experience, you thought?
It was fantastic, because you had to learn how to get the lights in. I directed most of the plays. There wasn't much at stake except the doing of the play. You weren't worried about who's seeing it. The Harvard Crimson reviewed you, and if they liked it, great, but the play had already closed. You know, you'd only done it for 3 performances or something of that sort.
Well, now, had you started writing when you were in college, or even before you went there? How did you hit on the theater as your medium?
It hadn't occurred to me to write plays. In high school, I did some journalism. I was a sports editor for a newspaper, and I thought I would go into the sciences, or engineering, actually. There was a lot of theater activity going on.
At Harvard?
At Harvard. Every weekend there were 2, 3, 4 new productions of sometimes new plays, but operas, Gilbert and Sullivan, Greek plays, whatever you had. So it was all over the place. And it was being put on wherever they could put it on. And because there wasn't the imprimatur of a big department behind it, anyone who did it wanted. There was a love of the theater that was there. It was a true amateur spirit, and I think it was very conducive to taking chances.
Right. And so, in terms of your writing, because well, first of all, Oh Dad, Poor Dad was a very kind of bold play in many ways in terms of the form and everything else. I mean, how did this come to you, or what was the genesis of it, really?
The genesis was actually, there was a playwriting contest.
Oh, at Harvard?
At Harvard, for one-act plays. And Oh Dad was in the form of a one-act play. It was a long one. I had a number of one-act plays done as an undergraduate. And when I graduated, that's what I wanted to do, was to be a playwright. And I imagined that I'd be around 30 before I had a play done professionally somewhere. And I was going off to Europe on a traveling fellowship that I'd won from Harvard to really study European theater, which was a very exciting and prospect. As I graduated, one of the houses announced a one-act play contest, and they were going to give $250 as a prize.
Which was a lot of money.
well, I'd never earned a cent from it. And I thought, and it was open to members of the university, and I was still technically a member of the university because I was on a fellowship. So I thought, and I was working on a long play at that time, and I thought, well, if I enter the contest and if I can win the contest, then I'll be a professional playwright, and that's terrific. So talk about corruption. I was after $250. It never occurred to me that the play would have any potential beyond that. And I would never have written the play. In looking back, there were numerous lessons for me as a playwright that I've tried to pass on to playwriting students and tried to remember subsequently. I had written these one-act plays, and the first one was a realistic play, and several of them are still produced. Yeah, the first one, in fact, Questioning of Nick, is produced now, and Samuel French has it, and a play called Sing to Me Through Open Windows. I'm trying to think whichever. But I felt, rightly or wrongly, that I had a good feeling for form. Right. And I'd written 2 full-length plays, so here was a one-act play. I wasn't going to be in the country. I wasn't going to be around. I'd always been at all the rehearsals.
Right.
And part of my feeling was, I'm just going to write a play and see what happens. And I'm not going to worry what the form is. It wasn't that I had ever worried, is this a comedy or a
right.
tragedy, or what is the form? But because I wasn't going to be there, I was going to just let my instincts take me somewhere, even if it led me to a place that I'd never seen this kind of
right.
theater before.
Right.
The idea for the play came from several sources. One, I was home during the summer, and
perhaps we should back up just for a second and say that it's about, unless you're going to include that in your description now, what it's about. It's about a...
I've never figured it out. We can tell what it deals with.
Well, we can tell what it deals with. A very predatory woman named Madame Rosepetal.
Madame Rosepetal.
Who is overbearing and imperious, to say the very least. And she has a piranha fish, which eats Siamese cats.
Anything you feed it.
And a Venus flytrap, plants that eat things. And like these 2 things, the fish and the plants, Madame Rosepetal eats husbands, children, everything else in sight. And she has with her her son, Jonathan, whom she's been overly protective of, and that's an understatement, I think we can say.
Right.
And that she never lets him out of the hotel room. Anyway, so go ahead now. So you started to say where the idea for this came from.
There was, I don't want to, I always keep thinking of the person that it's based upon, which is not directly my own family.
Right.
Except to the degree that you use everything that you know. Will see this and will be very hurt. But there was someone in our town in Long Island, Lawrence, Long Island, and there was a specific woman who had a much younger son, and she was a widow. And my mother would tell me stories about what this woman was doing, not directly related to Madame Rosepetal, but I came back this summer and she told me a story about this woman having gone to the Caribbean with her son. And that was sort of all I knew, and it seemed an odd place for her to go with this much younger son. And I knew some details about this boy, and I thought this boy was going to end up killing somebody. I thought he was really off the deep end. Apparently, it's turned out that he's as well-balanced. He grew up to be a totally well-balanced human being, so much for that. And I was curious about why this woman, who was a kind of a militant Puritan, was a widow and didn't want to go to sensuous hotspots, would go to the Caribbean with her young son and go to this place. It seemed surprising to me. So I began this play, and what I knew was that a girl would be brought in for the boy and a man would be brought in for her, and I knew someone was going to die. That's basically what I had. I didn't know much more. But I had the ending. But somebody was going to get killed, and if I just followed this route, it would lead to something destructive. I knew that she was there overtly with good intentions. I didn't know what they quite were. So the play was a process of exploration, and all of my plays since have been that. That is, the writing of the play is a chance for me to understand more about the material. If I know too much, then it's no good to write it.
Do you often know where the ending is going to be, as you did in that case, or do you often just set off into uncharted territory?
I have done both, and the plays that have worked for me, which is the plays that have been done, I realize now, only in the last several years, that what distinguished them from plays that I started and then had to abandon was that I knew the ending.
Really?
I didn't necessarily know it.
You didn't know all the details. You didn't know how you would get there, but you knew where you were going to arrive at.
I have to know the destination point. And I think for me, it's crucial. Now, I didn't necessarily need to know it on the first page. End of the World, for example, I stopped writing it a third of the way in because I didn't know the ending. And now I'm aware that I better know it, because I will run into trouble if I'm just trying to find the ending and just writing on. I'll write myself into a corner, and it doesn't have the kind of completion that I think an effective play has, that the end is in the beginning and the beginning and the end. As a sidetrack to that, an interesting one, I had a conversation once with Peter Schaffer at a party.
Who wrote Equus and Amadeus?
This was after Amadeus, and it was at a party, and I had just seen it, and I was very impressed on particularly one level. And I saw him at the party, and we had met, and I said, "What did you do when you discovered you had no second act?" And he knew what I meant. What I meant was that at the end of the first act, when Salieri has discovered Mozart's genius, he's ready to kill him. But Mozart hasn't composed Don Giovanni, he hasn't composed the Magic Flute, he's got years to go, and he's ready to kill the guy. And he's got a vamp for a second act. What do you do? And because he's structured it as if the man should now be plotting his death, but he's going to carry this whole distance. And Schaffer said that he realized that, and that's when he realized that the second act was Salieri's hell, was that he wasn't going to kill him, that he was meant to suffer living with Mozart alive. And we talked then about beginnings and ends, and this problem that a writer has, which is that you have to know the ending to begin, but you can't begin till you know the ending. And which one comes first? And sometimes you just have to get in there and start writing. But I think that you need to find that destination, which is what gives the play focus and momentum and structure, and it doesn't just meander. Fortunately, with Odad, I had an ending that was a destination, which was I have to push these characters forward. And quite soon it became apparent to me that it wasn't immediately in the beginning, but that the girl was going to die. But up till the end, the mother could have died, or the boy could have died, or the Commodore could have died. But it was enough of a focus that I wasn't just opening up the whole world and focusing on whatever came to mind. That's the dangerous thing, that you write, and suddenly an impulse comes in, and you follow it, and you're off track.
And so finally it worked out, of course, that Jonathan he can't stand the advances and the love offered by this young woman, so he smothers her.
He smothers her, and she dies, and he's probably as surprised by this as his mother is. And the title for the play came to me after I'd finished it.
But did you have the stuffed dead father hanging in the closet?
I knew that when he came in. There were influences of plays. I was throwing everything into this.
I want to ask you a little bit about that.
That was from The Visit. That was a Dürrenmatt
influence.
The
Dürrenmatt influence. Because one of the astonishing things, because we should say that this play went on to be done extremely successfully off-Broadway, directed by Jerome Robbins, one of the great directors of our time, and then went to Broadway, and it then was done all over after that. And but one of the extraordinary things, along with the success of it, the commercial success, which may have caught you by surprise, I mean, and you may have had to deal with that being very young at the time when it was, or maybe you dealt with it beautifully, I don't know. It wasn't a problem for you.
I think it was easier to deal with at that age than later on when you've been struggling and you're married and you have a family and suddenly you get success and you want to taste the fruits of success and there goes your marriage. You know. So it's something that you have to deal with at some point when it happens, because I think it always overwhelms you. It comes as a surprise. It's not commensurate with the work that you've done. It's out of all proportion. And if you take it too seriously, that kind of success, I think it is very, very destructive. And I didn't take
but I want to come back to something else, because you mentioned influences in Dürrenmatt and The Visit, the play that was that Peter Brook directed in this country. Because one of the things that I think struck people at the time was how avant-garde this was, how in tune with the times in terms of being a black farce, a tragic comedy, the kinds of things Ionesco was writing, other people were writing. It seemed to be you were the sort of American answer in a way to a lot of this. How much of that was conscious and how much of it was just the fact that you were trying anything at that time with nothing to lose?
It was that. I was throwing out all rules and allowing everything to come in and enter and to filter in. I was going to write a theater piece. And I let the play begin. I had the opening line. What I've looked back on is what did I have and why did it work? And I think I had enough and not too much. And I wasn't self-conscious at all. I never said to myself, will this be successful?
Right.
Will critics like it? Will the audiences like it? I was writing a play to tell myself a story. And it was taking an intuitive form in which I thought, I'm not going to worry that it falls into any particular category. Whatever occurs, occurs. And when the boy enters, the play opens, and the mother comes into a hotel room with bellboys, and she comes in followed by a coffin, and then her son comes in, and they have a lot of baggage with them. I really didn't know what the boy had. He comes in with a box, and then and he has stamps, he has coins, he has books.
So it really evolved. It evolved.
Absolutely came at the time. It was written very fast, and I was suspect of it because it came so quickly.
But it's one of those things where everything fell in place, really.
Everything fell in place because I knew enough about the characters, but not so much that I was locked in. If it had been my story, I would have just been inhibited. I think the theater is not a very good place for autobiography. You use yourself, but you have to create fictions.
Right.
It's the stage is not a real place.
And have that freedom to do that, to move out and to invent and to explore in what that you talk about.
I started the play, and she came in with a line, put it in the bedroom, which, by the way, I heard how the line should be read. And I know that that influence was having seen the movie of Importance of Being Earnest with Dame Edith Evans. Right. And it was the way she said the line, cucumber sandwiches.
That influence, put it in the bedroom.
Cucumber sandwiches. And I heard, it wasn't put in the bedroom, it was put it in the bedroom. And I remember Michael Ritchie, who went on to be a film director, directed the play at Harvard. I had not met him. He had never directed a play before. He talked himself into directing the play by lying, as many theater people do, about their credentials. And he said he had directed plays. He hadn't directed it. I was in Spain when the play was being done. He wrote a letter. This is also a lesson for playwrights. Sometimes the best thing is not to even be around rehearsals. He wrote me a letter and he said, and tape recorders had just come out, and wire recorders. And he wrote a letter and he said, you're not going to be here. Do you have any instructions to me? And I was in Mallorca, and I went to this little shop, and I found a tape, and I said, if Madame Rosepetal says, put it in the bedroom, if she says, put it in the bedroom, the play will have a chance of working because they'll know it's a comedy. If she says, put it in the bedroom, it will not work. That was my only instruction.
That was your only instruction.
And he went out, and he realized that no undergraduate could actually say, put it in the bedroom, and make it seem real. And he found a sort of semi-pro in Boston, and it made the play. When I came back from Europe to see it, it was this amazing success. I flew back to see it and say, what the hell did I do right? And I think what I did right was I never stopped to say, can you do this?
Right. You just went ahead without
just went ahead. And I did something that I thought, this is crazy. You can't do this on the stage.
I want to skip,
talking fly traps,
one of the
fish
things
that talk.
One of the things that you've done always, it seems to me, is experiment with form, is try out form as well as what you were trying to say. And I really would like to move to another, but it seems to me, very important play, Indians, in which you experimented with form. This is a play about Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull and about the whole Indian story in terms of America. And you cast that in the form of a Wild West show, which of course was very popular. I remember when I was young, they still had adjacent to the circus, when Ringling Brothers would come through town, they had next door to it in another tent a Wild West show. And there were these things. How did that form come to you in terms of Indians, of telling the story of the exploitation of the American Indian in terms of show business, in terms of the Wild West show? How did that evolve?
That was a very interesting route that it came, because the idea for the play came, it was my Vietnam play. And 68, it probably was around 66.
It was 68, 69 is when it was
done. So it was probably 66.
I think by the Royal Shakespeare
right.
in 68 and done in this country in 69.
I without going into details, because it isn't about that, I read an article in the New York Times about some minor atrocity in the Vietnam War. At the same time, I was in Vermont at this point, living in a ski house. I was by myself. I was working on a novel, which I then abandoned and never came back to. It was fine. It wasn't a great loss. To write Indians. Late in the day, I'd finished writing, and I'd gone to the town. I'd bought the New York Times. And I'd bought a record. I'd loved Charles Ives, and there was the first recording of one of Ives' symphonies. I think it was the third. And at this time, I lit a fire, and I sat down to read the Times, and I put on this Ives symphony. It was the premiere recording of it. And it was the confluence of two things. It was, tucked way back in the Times, was a story of an atrocity.
In Vietnam?
In Vietnam. It was a minor thing. Somebody, a van is going through the street in Saigon. Someone shouts there are Viet Cong inside the van. American soldiers open fire. They run up into a hospital nearby. They start shooting out of a window. They shoot somebody who's in a bed. 5 minutes, 20 people have been killed. There are no Viet Cong. And Westmoreland makes a statement, our hearts go out to the innocent victims of this. Just one more terrible story. But at the same time, I'm hearing an Ives piece of music, and this Ives music has two orchestras playing simultaneously, and one of them is sort of a seraphic choir. And the other is playing American folk songs, but in an Ivesian way, in a very in a kind of atonal way, very angular. And these two orchestras are bouncing off of each other. And you're hearing these tenting on the old campground, Columbia, the gem of the ocean. So it's very American patriotic, but it's very dark. And it's a combination of the ideal and perhaps the savage, in a sense, or distortion. It's a distortion of American idealism, in a way, although filtered through Ives' sense of Americana. That sound and that piece, instantly I said, it's what I had been trying to make sense of the Vietnam, as we all had, one way or another. And I didn't want to write a Vietnam play that just said that it's terrible.
Yes.
And I had seen some plays about Vietnam, which had my own political position, and I went out thinking there must be something for the Viet Cong side, or there must be something for the right-wing side, because they were propagandizing. Well, within a second and a half, I saw there was a play, and I realized that for me, what was happening now in Vietnam had happened before, and it was and I suddenly saw it as the imposition of one culture upon another, particularly upon a non-white culture. And so it was the Wild West.
And you made the connection of America in the late...
And the West. But not Buffalo Bill yet, not a Wild West show. But the Ives, but I also had a form instantly, which was that the play had to have the kind of the jagged sense of the Ives piece of music. Whatever the play was.
The two orchestras?
Yes, it was a mosaic. That for the play to work, what had made it come together for me was this contrapuntal sound, this angularity, this noise, these things fighting against each other. So whatever the play was going to be was that I saw that it had to be a mosaic. It wasn't a linear story.
Right.
It was a jagged juxtaposition of elements.
And so you went back and forth from the Wild West show, which featured, of course, Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull, who really was in Buffalo Bill's
it was all based on real
things, to actual scenes of the Indians dealing with U.S. senators and with the scenes with the president and so forth, in which real things were happening about broken treaties and broken promises and this, and then you would go back to the Wild West show.
You know, whatever the story was going to be, and I went back to history and started doing a lot of research, I knew that that what I had seen in a sort of inchoate way, but yet it was complete. I had to fracture chronology. It was a fractured story. It was a fractured event. That sense of the rhythm of the piece had to be there. And so that was always a kind of a guiding principle. That Ives sound coupled with this anger helped create the play.
In terms of, we've only got about 2 minutes here, but in terms of this play, did you know the ending of this play as you were working on it?
Once I went into the research, I knew about Buffalo Bill, but when I saw Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull, it was the way for me to tell the story. I could tell it through them. It could be a real event. And I just did research, and found cards, and knew that the play would begin to tell it to me. And the last scene, I did have the last scene. It was Buffalo Bill trying to justify what he couldn't justify.
He had done. And of course, the Buffalo Bill killed the buffalo.
Yes.
And partly just for sport, partly...
He made it possible. He found the secret weapon.
And of course, this was the food that had fed the Indians.
It was much easier, once he found that, it was much easier to wipe out the Indian by wiping out their food. And he had made it popular. So he was a very interesting figure for me to deal with. But I didn't set out to get the ending. I had the ending, and I realized only afterwards that that sense of the arc made the play
And so
work.
I suppose what came to you during the course of composition was moving back and forth.
That's right.
When to move from the Wild West theme to the other theme and this kind of thing.
Always trying to create in a dramatic form a kind of analog to what the visceral effect had been for me upon hearing that Ives music, the way it had moved me to the ideal and the profane, sacred and the profane in a way. Something beautiful had happened and something terrible.
Very briefly, the production. How did the production realize what you were after?
Not the one in New York. The one in Washington, the arena, did.
Yeah, it did realize what you were looking for. What was the difference then between the New York production?
The New York production, I think, was overproduced. There were too many lighting effects going on. I think Gene Frankel, who directed it, would agree. There was too much happening. It needed a greater spareness.
And was that true at the arena stage?
No, the arena, the configuration, it was better. It was like a Wild West show.
Which is what you...
I think ideally it would be done in a tent.
What is the best production of it you've ever seen? Have you seen it? How many times have you seen it?
After a while, I stopped seeing most of my plays because I always find something wrong.
Right.
And what works I take for granted.
So you don't.
But I think the arena production was the most exciting.
And
that was the most exciting.
But it was successful, wasn't it?
It was very successful down there, down at the arena stage in Washington.
I'd love to see the play again. On that note, we have to close. This has been the Harold Clurman Seminar in Theater, and our guest has been Arthur Kopit. Arthur, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.